Hello, Banter Nation. How are you? I'm your host, Max Engel, and today I'm joined with Michael Pinto and Cole Curtin. So, your weekly dose of banter and emancipation is going to be focusing on the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, Diary of an American Slave, and our primary source, the American Anti-Slavery Society Almanac from 1838. Absolutely two extremely pieces of first-hand information from the 19th century. So, we are going to be dividing this podcast up into 4 parts. We're going to be talking about the autobiographies, societal impacts then in the 19th century. Part 2, we're going to be talking about the almanacs, societal impacts then in the 19th century. Part 3, we're going to be talking about the similarities and the differences of the almanac and the autobiography. And then part 4, we are going to talk about the almanac and the autobiography's societal impacts today in the 21st century. It's a journey of slavery to freedom, just like an unbroken will. So in the autobiography, we see immense amounts of brutality, violence, the violence of slavery. We see lots of dehumanizing events that happen while Frederick Douglass is a slave. We see a person who's so determined to overcome the system and so determined to educate himself. So the Almanac, on the other hand, was founded in 1833, made up of mostly working class individuals. It's mostly connected, like-minded individuals who were they produced, several contributors produced a weekly or a monthly almanac filled with pictures, stats, essays, and we're going to be talking about the autobiography and the almanac's societal impacts directly in the Northeast, Southeast, and Midwest. So, Michael, I think you had you had a good point you were talking about earlier when you were explaining like how Frederick Douglass educating himself became a weapon, mm-hmm. or a tool. So how was he able to become the eloquent writer that we read today?
So, as we learned in his autobiography, we learned how Frederick Douglass was a slave for Mr. and Mrs. Auld, and Mrs. Auld had the courtesy to try to teach him how to read. So she started by teaching him the alphabet. And Mr. Auld caught wind of this, and he completely disagreed with Mrs. Auld and told her how this is not acceptable and how a slave should only be taught how to obey his master. However, with this, he's already learning the alphabet. He took this and ran with it, mm-hmm. and continued to learn how to read. By spending time with the privileged white boys, they would teach him how to read, and he considered them his teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He was just denied education by Mr. Auld. This was a extremely effective method of perpetuating the cycle of slavery in slaveholding states. It would be beneficial for a master to keep their slaves as uneducated because
try to keep them in the darkness the best
mm-hmm.
they can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So what were some more examples of him learning to read?
So he also learned how to write, and the method he used was by copying Master Thomas's copybook, mm-hmm. and copying word for word what he saw and what was written in that book. And over the time of a couple years and dedication and trying his best, he ended up learning exactly how to write, and he almost perfected Master Thomas's, which is an educated man, handwriting and the way he wrote, and that's could be a good factor on why he was so his writing was so eloquent. Eloquent, yeah.
No, if an organization like the American Anti-Slavery Society would read a journey like this, it would be very inspirational.
And I think, if you think about how hard it is for even us or anybody to learn a different language, and that's with a teacher, with all of the necessary resources you might need, and to think that he was able to do this
All on his own,
and just by copying someone's notes that they had, or just by utilizing the people in the town, by using the white children, as you said, who were educated and who were able to read, to be able to use them and just figure it out by yourself. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and another thing I forgot to note is during his errands that the masters would send him on, he would take his book that he was probably given by the white boys that taught him, and he would just take a little bit of time each time he went for errands and look at a lesson and learn how to read, and he would try his best to remember that information, and then he ended up doing a great job at that because he taught himself everything he needed to know.
So Frederick Douglass, born in 1818, around the early 30s is when his childhood begins to end. He becomes a young adult. What are some of the firsthand brutality and violence that he talks about in his autobiography?
Starting off with the whipping of his Aunt Hester, Douglass experiences as a young child, and I thought it really shows the brutality it was like for being a slave, and
one of the first serious forms of violence he'd seen in his life.
So I quoted this, and he said, "I have often been awakened at the dawn of day by the most heart-wrenching shrieks of an own aunt of mine, whom he, the overseer, which is his master, used to tie up to Joyce and whip upon her naked back till she was completely covered with blood. No words, no tears, no prayers from his gory victim seemed to move his iron heart from its bloody purpose."
Yeah, that would have been an empowering piece of information that would have been resonated with the American Anti-Slavery Society and just the United States. Definitely, we need to cover the Mr. Covey episode from the autobiography.
Yes. So. The beating by Mr. Covey. He was only in his new home for about a week before his master gave him a very severe whipping, cutting his back, causing the blood to run down his back, and raising ridges on his flesh as large as his little fingers. And this is just a week into his new home, and he was already severely beaten.
Yeah. I want to transition a little bit into the autobiography's relation to the abolitionist movement. So, Cole, you had some thoughts about that earlier.
Sure, yeah. This autobiography, it definitely served as a critical tool in the abolitionist movement, just in general, because, it delivered a raw, unfiltered, first-hand account of slavery, which most people were not aware of at the time, Most people in the North, and even in the South, too, either chose to just kind of keep it out of sight, or they just really didn't know what was going on. So it just showed the brutality of the system itself. It also shows just, the daily hardships of being a slave and having those experiences.
Yeah, even for a region in the Southeast and the Deep South, it would give it would make some readers have to question the morality of slavery.
Absolutely. I think this autobiography, if it got into the hands of even a slaveholder, it's so powerful and it's written so well that it has that ability to change someone's perspective on what they thought and what they've always known throughout their entire life. Was just, it shows you how, important and as well as how inspirational it is, I guess. It also, throughout the abolitionist movement in this book, this autobiography, it ignited debates about what should be done, because not everybody, but a lot of people thought that this institution is outdated and something should be done about it, but with nothing, with no other people, without having other like-minded individuals that you know of, you can't really do anything about it. But forming these coalitions of people with like-minded ideas definitely helped spark the abolitionist movement and get it going from what it was before.
Yeah, in the American Anti-Slavery Society Almanac 30 from 1838, we see lots of depictions of violence, like lots of black and white, just drawn images of the Native American or the nation robbing an Indian chief of his wife. So the almanac covers a wide variety of topics. They address women's rights. Many of the members of the society were women. The AASS advocated for women's rights, published women's work in their almanacs. They had women in positions of leadership. Now we are going to each talk a little bit about how the almanac was received throughout the United States. So Cole has how it was received in the southeast. Michael has how it was received in the northeast and received in the Midwest and just general in the United States. So the Midwest was a very diverse region at the time. Every person who read the autobiography would be able to see Douglas's views on slavery, and it was a catalyst for shaping people's views on the subject. Some slave-holding people and others were anti-slavery. So it was definitely important for shaping the perspective of the Midwesterners in the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
So
the Northerners also played a crucial role in this. It played a crucial role in advancing the abolitionist cause, his writing. It gave a humanization to the enslaved people. It influenced on anti-slavery movements, increased awareness and empathy for the ones that are enslaved. It also had impact on political debates, discussing whether or not this is just or unjust, validation of abolition's argument.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, the society couldn't ignore this narrative.
The facts,
Sure.
especially, right in
Absolutely.
everyone's face now. So
I want to hear about how it was received in the Deep South.
Yeah, so contrast to probably, most of the points that Michael just brought up. In the South, it was, received with anger, hatred, disbelief that someone would even think about doing this. They saw it as pretty much a threat to the institution itself because, as you just said, it exposed the harsh realities of slavery, and people could no longer deny this. It opened people's eyes up. They were also, they were scared of an uprising of the slaves because it just goes to show once again how powerful this narrative is. And it reached some Southerners. I mean, I'm sure that some folks read it and said something should be changed,
Yeah, so now we're going to move into part 2, the almanac's societal impacts then in the 19th century. So, like I've already said, it was founded in 1833, mostly working class individuals. I believe that the almanac was a huge networking tool. It would create a big network of people, like-minded individuals, for something for them to really stand on. So, yeah. So, what did you think the almanac was mostly like?
Well, overall, especially then, I think it was used as a tool for education to inform people of the movement itself and also the effects of slavery. So within the almanac, you would find statistics, data, facts, to kind of educate readers about the truths. And here I have some pages from the almanac itself showing statistics photos and certain essays written by a collection of people to show their support in the movement itself and to expose the harsh truths or realities of slavery.
Yeah, some of these pieces of art are like really disturbing. People
really
being
is.
assaulted, and
I mean, even looking here at page 30 at the statistics of how many slaves or how many captives were brought into the United States for the slave trade, it's really just jaw-dropping that how it increases over time. And even with, them outlawing the import of slaves, the slave trade still went on inside the United States, nonetheless.
I'd like to add to that, another example of it being a tool is there would be advertisements in these newspapers, you can call them, and the funds from those advertisements would go to the abolitionist cause, which is really, really cool to think about, that they were
Absolutely.
funding this just by writing and explaining what's going on in the world.
Because for the most part, I mean, their movements were funded out of pocket, so they needed outlets like this to get their message out.
Yep. And their message and just informing people. So for footnote 4 in page 4 of the almanac, I have information saying Connecticut, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, colored men are denied the right to vote. Page 14 of the almanac, showing how even though they had schools for colored girls, people were still trying to put a stop to. Now we're going to, and also many institutions were receiving the almanac in their society. Societies like the Quaker meetings, libraries and debates, Northern Free Black societies, different abolitionist religious groups, religionists.
Yeah, really folks with all sorts of different backgrounds.
Interesting fact, Frederick Douglass escaped for his freedom the year 1838, and that is the year of the almanac that we chose to analyze. So we are now going to move into part 3, where we talk about the similarities and differences of the almanac and autobiography. So the overwhelmingly most important fact is that the almanac and the autobiography include primary sources of enslaved people. So obviously it would empower the people in the abolitionist movement. How would you, what are some
Well, I think it's definitely important to remember the fact that the almanac was written by several contributors, whereas the autobiography was obviously written by one person. And I think that each in its own way resonates with the population in different ways, where the autobiography may touch you more just because it's such a personal experience that he's writing about, where the almanac is essays, of course, but also statistics, pictures, and other ways that they can connect with the general population who may be with or against their movement.
On page 15 of the almanac, there are lawmakers and mobs that are deciding that they won't stand for the colored girls' schools, and they decided to burn them down, even though they had the right for an education. And but it just shows that even the lawmakers didn't care. They were involved in the destruction of these places of learning and for the children. It's very disgraceful to see that.
I think it shows you how hostile of an environment it was during this time as well, and it almost doubles down on how impressive it is that an autobiography or an almanac document like this was even published at this time.
Exactly, yeah.
So another similarity, both pieces of art, or both writings were highly talked about in abolitionist circles.
So actually, one more thing that I would like to bring up here in regards of the differences and similarities. The autobiography of Frederick Douglass is obviously, timeless work of art written so well. And whereas the almanac is more of a historical document, so I just thought that would be important to bring up.
Going to move into part 4, where we talk about the almanac and the autobiography's impacts on society today. Michael, what's the impact of these two?
Yeah, so in the Northeast, where abolitionists, settlements were stronger, Douglas's narrative reinforced the anti-slavery movement resolve. It served as a powerful tool for abolitionists to rally support, mobilize public opinion, and influence policy discussions.
Well, it continues to be a powerful educational tool used, in schools and universities throughout, and it offers and it promotes discussions about slavery, racism, human rights, and fostering a more comprehensive understanding of the region's complex history.
Yeah, so the Midwest, you're able to explore many different accounts from within the almanac, statistics of people being sold, photos and paragraphs of assaults and lynchings that are happening. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for talking to me about these, about the almanac and the autobiographies, similarities, differences, impacts on society in the 19th century and in the 21st century. So
thank you for having us.
Thank you for having
We
us.
had a great conversation, I feel.